You don't have as much time as you think. And the most dangerous part? You've probably gotten really good at wasting it. This isn't about productivity or waking up at 5 a.m. This is about something deeper, something Carl Jung spent his life trying to explain. Why so many of us sleepwalk through our days, living out roles we didn't choose, chasing goals that never feel like ours, and slowly losing the thread of who we are. You might not call it that. You might just say you're tired, burned out, unmotivated, or stuck in a rut. But underneath all that, there's a quieter fear that slips in when the noise dies down. What if this isn't who I was supposed to be? What if I've been performing someone else's life? Jung didn't see this as a modern dilemma. He saw it as a crisis of the soul, a disconnection not just from purpose, but from the true self buried underneath layers of performance. And when that disconnection lasts long enough, it starts to feel like reality, like there's no way out, like this is just how life is. But Jung offered a way back, not an easy one, not a quick one, but a path that begins when you finally stop lying to yourself about the life you're living. He called it individuation, the process of becoming whole, becoming real, becoming you again. If you've ever felt like your life doesn't fit you, like you're wearing a mask that never comes off, like your days are passing but you're not really in them, then this isn't just a video. It's a mirror, and it's time to look at what you've been avoiding. Let's talk about how it happens. How people end up lost inside lives they never meant to build. You grow up thinking life has a structure. Go to school, follow the rules, pick a safe path, keep your head down. The world doesn't shout at you to be yourself. It whispers for you to fit in. Most people listen. At first it feels like you're making progress. You hit the milestones, get the degree, land the job, maybe even get the house. And yet, somewhere in all that, the colors start fading. You start living on autopilot, recycling the same week over and over. Work, sleep, scroll, repeat. You tell yourself you're fine, but that word, fine, starts to rot from the inside out. Jung saw this coming. He believed most people live what he called a collective life, a life shaped more by the expectations of society than by the reality of their own desires or values. He wasn't being poetic. He meant it literally. The job you picked, the beliefs you inherited, even the personality you show the world. None of it is guaranteed to be yours. And if it's not yours, it will slowly start to feel like a trap. The problem is, the trap doesn't always look painful. Sometimes it looks comfortable, familiar, even successful. And that's what makes it so hard to recognize. Ask yourself something. When was the last time you made a decision that didn't come from fear, habit, or other people's approval? Most people don't even get the chance to ask that. They're too busy surviving a life they never stop to question. Here's what makes it worse. Our culture celebrates this kind of sleepwalking. If you're busy, compliant, and productive, no one asks how dead you feel inside. But Jung didn't care about surface metrics. He was focused on meaning, and meaning, he believed, comes from the self, not the persona. A persona is the version of you the world wants. The self is who you actually are. The more distance there is between the two, the more restless you become. That restlessness, it's not laziness. It's not lack of motivation. It's your true self shaking the cage. And if you ignore it long enough, it stops knocking. It disappears. This is where most people give up, thinking something's wrong with them. But there's nothing wrong with you. There's something wrong with the life that never asked who you really are. The next part of this journey is about that exact question. Who is the person behind the performance? That's where we go next. Let's talk about the false self. The version of you that shows up every day and pretends to have it all figured out. This is the part people see, the one that smiles when you're tired, agrees when you don't want to, performs when you'd rather disappear. It's the mask you wear, not because you're fake, but because it feels safer than being real. Carl Jung believed we all create this persona early on. It helps us survive. As kids, we learn quickly what gets love, what gets attention, what keeps us out of trouble. So we adjust. We tone parts of ourselves down, exaggerate others, and eventually forget what the original version even looked like. Now, here's the problem. The longer you wear the mask, the harder it is to tell where it ends and you begin. Think about it. Have you ever caught yourself laughing at something you didn't find funny? Agreeing in a conversation you didn't believe in? Staying silent to keep the peace even when it tore you up inside? That's not just politeness. Over time, those moments pile up, and one day, you realize you've become a stranger to yourself. In therapy sessions, this shows up a lot. People saying, "I don't know who I am anymore." But usually, it's not that they don't know. It's that they've never been given the space or the permission to find out. We live in a time where identity is often curated. Social media is full of clean narratives and highlight reels. But Jung would have called most of it persona maintenance. We're constantly broadcasting who we want to be seen as, not who we really are. And the real you? It waits in the quiet. Sometimes it breaks through when you're alone at night and something feels off, even if nothing's wrong. Sometimes it shows up as that sinking feeling after achieving something that was supposed to make you happy. A promotion, a wedding, a big move. You get there. And then the silence hits. That silence is yourself asking, why did we come here? The most painful part of all this is how slowly it happens. You don't surrender yourself all at once. It happens in tiny, quiet moments. The job you said yes to, the dream you gave up on, the opinions you stopped voicing. No one notices. You might not even notice. But deep down, something starts to ache. And that ache doesn't go away until you stop living for applause and start looking inward. Until you stop asking, what should I be? And start asking, who am I really? That's what we'll confront next. Jung's blueprint for answering that question. Because the false self isn't just exhausting to maintain. It's keeping you from ever meeting the real one. Here's where it starts to shift. If the false self is a performance, then what's behind the curtain? Jung's answer was simple in theory, but deeply personal in practice. He called it individuation, the journey of becoming whole. Not perfect, not enlightened, whole. That means uncovering all the parts of yourself you've pushed away, ignored, or forgotten, and bringing them into the light. Most people think change begins with adding something. New habits, new goals, new affirmations. But individuation doesn't start with adding. It starts with facing. Facing the parts of yourself that feel inconvenient, uncomfortable, even ugly. Because until you do, you're not living a full life. You're just managing a character. Now here's the part most people miss. Individuation doesn't mean escaping your life to go find yourself on some mountain. Jung wasn't talking about detachment or retreat. He was talking about integration. Living with all of who you are, right where you are. Let's make it real. Maybe you've spent your life being the strong one, the dependable one. People lean on you. You rarely ask for help. On the outside, it looks like strength. On the inside, it can feel like isolation. Individuation means asking where that pattern came from. Was it modeled to you? Was it a survival strategy? And what has it cost you? Or maybe you're the peacemaker, always smoothing things over, always putting others first. That seems kind, until you realize your own needs never make it to the surface. That's not humility, that's self-erasure. Jung believed we all carry these roles for a reason. but they're not the end of the story. The moment you start asking why you react the way you do, why certain things set you off, why you hide the parts of yourself you do, that's the doorway into individuation. And don't confuse this for overthinking. This isn't analysis for the sake of control. It's reflection that leads to transformation. You're not trying to become someone new. You're peeling off everything that isn't you. Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But privilege doesn't mean it's easy. It means most people never get there. Because this path, it doesn't flatter the ego, it threatens it. That's why most people abandon it halfway through. But the ones who stay, they don't just change how they live, they change who's living. That brings us to the next truth, one most people avoid. Before you can become yourself, you have to face what you've been running from. And that means meeting the shadow. This is the part people tend to skip, not because it's unimportant, but because it's uncomfortable. Jung called it the shadow, all the parts of you that you've buried, denied, or pretended never existed. We all have one, and whether you like it or not, it runs your life from the background. The shadow isn't evil. That's a misunderstanding. It's not some dark force lurking in your psyche, waiting to ruin you. It's made of human things: anger, jealousy, insecurity, neediness, shame, traits you were taught were wrong or ugly, so you push them out of sight. But hiding them doesn't erase them. It just means they show up sideways. Ever snapped at someone over something small and surprised even yourself? Ever found yourself silently resenting a friend's success? Or judging someone harshly for traits you secretly relate to? That's the shadow leaking out. Not in words, but in reactions you can't fully explain. A common example? The person who prides themselves on being nice, always composed, always agreeable. But under that surface might be a well of suppressed anger, frustrations they've never voiced, boundaries they've never set. When that anger finally erupts, it doesn't come out clean, it comes out distorted. Jung believed ignoring the shadow doesn't make you good, it makes you fragmented. And here's the real problem. The more you repress it, the more power it has. You become reactive without knowing why. You sabotage relationships, you repeat patterns because you're not actually choosing. You're being pushed by parts of yourself you've never faced. This is why individuation demands more than self-awareness. It demands confrontation. Looking at your own pettiness, your envy, your pride, your fear of being ordinary. Not to judge it, not to shame yourself, but to see it clearly and say, yes, this too is part of me. Most people will never do this. It's easier to project, to blame other people, blame the system, blame your childhood, anything but turn inward. But when you finally do, when you sit with the parts of yourself you were taught to hide, you stop being controlled by them. You stop reacting blindly. You gain choice. And in that choice, a new kind of self-respect begins to form. One that's not about perfection or performance. One that's rooted in honesty. And from there, something opens up. You've faced what you've buried. Now you're ready for what comes after, the part where everything starts to fall apart, on purpose. There's a moment in this journey that nobody warns you about. After you confront the shadow, after you stop pretending, something starts to crumble. The identity you spent years building, the version of you that everyone knows and expects, begins to fall apart. This is the descent. And it's not dramatic. It's quiet, disorienting. You wake up one day and the things that used to give you meaning don't land the same way. The job title doesn't impress you. The routines feel robotic. Even your goals start to seem borrowed, like they were handed to you, not chosen. What you're feeling isn't failure. It's the dismantling of the persona. Jung understood this phase deeply. He believed that for a person to truly become themselves, they must go through a collapse of the false identity. Not a physical breakdown, but a psychological one, a kind of ego death. It feels like loss, because in a way it is. You're losing a version of yourself you once believed in. And if that sounds scary, it is. You start questioning things you never used to question. Your values, your relationships, even your own past. You look back and realize how much of your life was driven by fear, by image, by survival instincts you didn't even notice. This descent can look different for everyone. For one person, it might be leaving a job that once felt like a dream. For another, it could be walking away from a relationship that no longer fits, even if nothing is technically wrong. Sometimes it's smaller, stepping out of social circles, losing interest in hobbies, pulling away from roles that once defined you. And the people around you might not understand. You'll hear things like, "You've changed," or "Why are you being so distant?" That's because, from the outside, it looks like you're falling apart. But internally, you're making space, clearing the noise. This isn't a crisis, it's a process. Think of the caterpillar. It doesn't just grow wings, it dissolves first. There's a complete breakdown before the transformation. And for a while, it looks like chaos. But in that mess, something essential is forming. This stage is where most people give up. They run back to what's familiar. They rebuild the mask. They convince themselves that change was just a phase. But if you stay with it, if you don't rush to fill the silence, what comes next will feel real in a way nothing ever has before. This is where the self starts to emerge. Not the curated self, not the survival self, the real one. And that changes everything. Once the old structure falls, there's an opening, not a grand cinematic rebirth. No fireworks, no spotlight, just stillness. And in that stillness, you begin to hear something softer, yourself. This part is about emergence. You're no longer scrambling to keep up an image. You're not running from discomfort. You've already faced the shadow, let the false self collapse, and sat in the wreckage. Now, you start noticing things you never had the space to notice before. You don't chase meaning. You start recognizing it. Small things begin to feel different. A quiet walk actually quiets you. Conversations that used to drain you now bore you because you're done pretending. You're no longer desperate to be understood because you finally understand yourself enough to be okay with not being seen. And no, this doesn't mean everything suddenly clicks. It's messy. Some days, you'll still miss the mask. You'll want to slide back into old roles because they were familiar and safe. But you won't fit there anymore. That version of you can't hold the weight of who you're becoming. What you're learning in this stage is how to build a life that reflects you, not just accommodates others. You start saying no to things that once defined your worth. No to burnout disguised as ambition. No to friendships that revolve around pretending. No to timelines that were never yours to begin with. Here's a simple, real-world shift. Maybe you stop performing competence at work when you're overwhelmed, and instead, you actually ask for support. Or maybe you admit to someone close that you've outgrown the version of yourself they keep expecting. That's not self-help fluff. That's rebellion. Jung didn't believe the self was something you achieve. He believed it was something you uncover, piece by piece, truth by truth, through inner work, through choice, through the courage to keep living with questions instead of grasping for quick answers. And when you start living like this, something unexpected happens. You don't just feel more alive, you feel whole. Not in a polished way, in a grounded, flawed, real way. And the people who connect with you from this place, they're not drawn to your mask. They're drawn to your clarity. This is what happens when you stop wasting your life performing and start living it honestly. But don't mistake this for an end point. This is the beginning of a new responsibility. Because now that you've remembered who you are, you have to live like it. Every day. In real choices. That's the next step. How to stay true when the world keeps trying to pull you back. Once you've caught a glimpse of who you really are, beneath the roles, beneath the noise, you face a quieter challenge. How do you stay aligned in a world that profits off your distraction? This part isn't about discovery anymore. It's about commitment. Jung was clear about one thing. Becoming yourself isn't a one-time event. It's a lifelong task, a constant negotiation between the demands of the outer world and the voice you've finally begun to hear inside. The hardest part? That voice doesn't scream, it whispers, and everything around you will try to drown it out. You'll be tempted to fall back into old roles, old patterns, old validations. Maybe your old job starts to look appealing again, even though you left for a reason. Maybe you second-guess boundaries you've set because people push back. Or maybe you start editing yourself again in conversations just to avoid tension. So here's the point we're really talking about now. How to live from the self, not the persona, even when it costs you comfort. This means choosing truth over harmony, depth over approval. It means walking away from situations that drain you, even if they've been in your life for years. And it means letting go of how others define you, especially the people who knew the old version best. Some people won't get it. That's normal. Growth threatens people who are still committed to pretending. But that's not your burden to carry. Living from the self doesn't mean being bold all the time. It just means being honest. If something doesn't feel right, you stop forcing it. If a path feels hollow, you stop chasing it. And if a version of you feels like armor, you take it off, even if it leaves you exposed. Let's bring it into something real. Say you used to overwork because deep down you tied your worth to being productive. Maybe you don't anymore. But suddenly you notice you feel guilty resting. That guilt isn't a sign you're doing something wrong. It's the residue of an old belief. And you have to face it every time you rest anyway. That's what the real work looks like. Small, quiet acts of truth that nobody applauds. Choosing your values over your reputation. Making peace with being misunderstood. Saying yes to who you are without needing anyone else to co-sign it. This isn't glamorous, it's slow, sometimes it's boring, but it's yours. And over time, that matters more than anything else. Because now, the life you're building, it doesn't depend on who's watching. It grows from who's finally awake. Still, there's something you need to hear. Something Jung hinted at, but few people say plainly. This path, most people will never walk it. Let's talk about why. Most people will never take this path. Not because they're incapable, not because they're unintelligent, but because it asks for more than what most are willing to give. Honesty, discomfort, letting go of everything that once made them feel safe, even if it was killing them slowly. Carl Jung said, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul." That wasn't a metaphor. He meant it. Watch how often people double down on their image when it starts to crack. Watch how often they blame their circumstances instead of asking who they've become inside of them. And watch how society rewards that, calls it resilience, when sometimes it's just denial in a better outfit. The truth is, staying asleep is easier. It's easier to keep repeating your routines than to question why they exist in the first place. It's easier to post curated happiness than to admit you're quietly unraveling. It's easier to chase distractions than to sit in silence and ask, what am I avoiding? But ease and peace aren't the same thing. One keeps you numb, the other wakes you up. You can scroll through endless content about healing, purpose, alignment. You can read every quote, like every post, nod in agreement. But until you actually start making different choices, tiny ones, daily ones, nothing changes. You stay stuck in the same feedback loop, waiting for a breakthrough that won't come through inspiration alone. It shows up in practice, in paying attention, in saying no when it would be easier to go along, in admitting when you're lost without pretending to be fine. You don't have to take this path. No one's forcing you. But if you're listening to this right now and something in your chest tightens, like a quiet ache you've been ignoring for too long, that's not nothing. That's a signal. It means something inside you is awake. Still buried, maybe. Still scared, but awake. And the longer you pretend not to hear it, the harder it is to find your way back when you're finally ready. So the question becomes, will you go back to sleep? Or will you keep walking? Because what comes next, if you choose to keep going, isn't theory. It's real life. It's the quiet decision to stop wasting who you are and to start living like you remember. If you've made it this far, really sat with all of it, the persona, the mask, the shadow, the breakdown, the rebirth, then you already know the truth most people try to avoid. You were never really lost. You were just layered, covered up by the expectations, the performances, the fear of being too much or not enough. Carl Jung didn't give us easy steps or motivational fluff. What he gave us was a mirror, one that doesn't flatter but reveals. And the question that mirror keeps asking is simple. Will you keep outsourcing your identity to the world? Or will you finally sit with yourself long enough to remember who's been in there all along? The people who waste their lives aren't always the reckless ones. More often, they're the ones who play it safe, who follow every rule, meet every deadline, please every person, while quietly burying every part of themselves that doesn't fit the script. And look, there's no shame in that. You did what you had to do to survive. But survival isn't the same as living. And now you get to choose. You can go back to curating your image, keeping it light, nodding through conversations that don't mean anything, or you can start listening to that quiet pull inside you. The one that says, we're not here to perform. We're here to become. That pull, that's the beginning of everything. So here's where I'll leave you. With a challenge, not a conclusion. Pay attention to what you avoid. Watch your reactions. Question your habits. And more than anything, stop waiting for the world to give you permission. It won't. It never does. You give that to yourself. And if this spoke to you in any way, if you felt even a flicker of recognition, like, yes, this is what I've been needing to hear, don't just move on to the next video. Comment below what part hit you the most. Subscribe if you want more work like this that doesn't sugarcoat the truth. And if you're already walking this path or thinking about it, share this with someone who needs to start. Because this isn't just content. It's the invitation you've been postponing. And the longer you wait, the quieter yourself becomes. So ask yourself, are you done wasting your life yet?